Welcome back. We were discussing certain operational aspects of the AFM. In fact, it is not even the exact operational aspect of the AFM, it is how to get your instrument ready, and it involves pretty interesting physics. So, that is exactly what we were talking. So, now this slide I will quickly recap. I hope this slide should make sense to all of you. You should be able to identify all the components: cantilever with its reflective coating. These are the arrows represent the screws. So, you rotate the screws, so to bring the cantilever in the path of the laser light that is coming from the laser source. As a consequence of this, the laser light starts to reflect out from here. What you now do is you again turn the two screws, and so you bring your photodiode into you make your photodiode move in such a way that the reflected laser light in fact falls at the center of the photodiode, and the reading on the photodiode is 0 volt. Now, I will just superimpose the sample in this particular picture. So, your sample is far away over here. So, this process of optically coupling these three is known as alignment. And what is next? Next is that you would like to bring in your sample in close proximity with the cantilever, and that process, what you would do, you would use a stepper motor. Hardware wise, you can either push up the sample or you can bring down the whole assembly, both the variants are available, and you would like to bring it in close proximity to the tip, so that the tip can start rastering or scanning. And well, there are issues like how long do you bring it, where do you stop this approach process, etc., etc. So, let us see what is done. This is what happens. So, first let us say that sample holder is bringing, there is a stepper motor is acting here, and it is bringing the sample holder close to the tip. Initially, the tip is far away from the sample and there is absolutely no interaction. So, on this curve you are somewhere over here, there is no interaction. Please do not forget that you have chosen a cantilever material which is malleable enough or soft enough to deform to the magnitude of van der Waals forces. That is extremely important. You are bringing it up, see between these two images the separation distance has reduced, but still you are far away and therefore, there is no interaction. But here, as you go closer, you cross this separation distance, and then over this area the tip and the surface starts to interact. But as it starts to interact, what is the nature of the interaction? In fact, the nature of the interaction is attractive. Right. So, what happens is that, and so as a consequence of the presence of the surface, now the cantilever feels an attraction. So, this was the cantilever, surface was far away. Let us say the surface is moving up, and now the surface is close enough to the cantilever. So, ideally this was the initial configuration of the cantilever, but what happens is, because of this attraction, intersurface attraction, the cantilever now feels the attraction and bends like this, because your cantilever material is such that it deforms to the magnitude of van der Waals forces, right. So, you are essentially somewhere in this region of the force curve, right. Now, what happens? This is not the point where you would like to stop. So, the tip is still moving up, the surface is still moving up, and these two eventually come in contact. But there is something interesting about when they come in contact. See, I have drawn a dotted blue line here, which I mark as line L1, and for triggering a discussion, I am drawing another green line which I am marking as L2. What is the difference between these two lines? L1 is in fact the actual elevation or where the tip and the surface come in contact. Okay. Now, what is L2? L2 is also interesting. It is like that is the plane or line at which the cantilever and the line the substrate would have come in contact had it is the elevation at which the cantilever tip and the surface would have, this is extremely important to understand, would have come in contact, but when had there been no deflection in the cantilever. Please follow this. This is not a very important thing that you need to understand for understanding an AFM image or for doing your research, but this is very interesting science. I really appreciate it. So, what is the line L2? Had there been a hypothetical situation that you have taken a tip that is too stiff to van der Waals forces, or you think of a hypothetical situation again that there is no van der Waals force, no attractive or repulsive force between the tip and the surface, then what would have happened? You are moving your sample surface up, the tip remains unfazed, it does not care what is happening, and it waits till the last moment when the sample comes in contact. Anyway, it will come in contact because you are physically moving the sample, but this is like as you are moving the sample up, as the separation distance between the tip and the sample reduces and you sort of enter this regime, what happens is, since the tip is flexible enough to the forces or malleable enough to the forces of the magnitude of van der Waals forces, you have chosen your tip like that for making a successful AFM, the tip bends like this because it experiences the attraction imparted, or not the tip, the cantilever bends like this as it experiences the attraction imparted due to the presence or proximal presence of the substrate, and therefore, they come in contact at an elevation L1 and it does, so that is ahead of L2. So, contact is established between the tip and the sample surface ahead than what would have been the contact point had there been no interaction, right. I hope you have got the idea clearly. So, these two come in contact at the elevation L1, which is before the point L2, where the two would have come in contact had there been no attractive interaction, and this is what is called, this phenomena is what is called jump to contact. Right, and this is what you see here. Right, this is jump to contact. So, this is the deflection that is observed in the cantilever, but please do not forget, in the previous step during alignment you have optically coupled the laser source, the cantilever, and the reflected light was falling at the center of the QPD. So, now what you are telling, what we are observing, that because the surface has approached the cantilever, which was initially like this, has now become like this. It has sort of bent, I will not say it has deformed, but it has bent. Earlier laser was falling here, and getting reflected in this direction. Now also laser source is the same, so it falls here, but since it has deflected, now laser goes in another direction. So there is a change in direction and what is going to be the consequence? Consequence is going to be felt. So now we, during jump to contact, the cantilever has a configuration like this, laser is falling from the same angle. It is actually the same thing, I am just drawing side by side to make you understand what is happening, and laser light does not fall here, let us say laser light falls here. So immediately there is in fact non-zero reading on the QPD. So this is the jump to contact. This is not very important from the standpoint of operating an AFM, because AFM does not really run in this mode. None of the modes, commercial AFMs operate in this mode. Anyway, but you see, if we look carefully, so this is the initial configuration where the laser was falling at the center of the QPD, and this is the jump to contact, and therefore, in fact this drawing is partially wrong. Typically laser falls over here. Do you stop there? The answer is no. Why you do not stop there is something we will discuss later. So now the situation is something different. Let us first understand what happens at the cantilever, then we will see what happens at the QPD. So these two come in contact, and now the stepper motor continues to move upward. What happens as a consequence of that? As a consequence of that, now this point, the tip, is sort of fixed to the surface at this particular point, and the surface is moving upward, right. So the tip is fixed to the surface like this. Initially when we aligned, the tip was, let us say the pen is the tip, this is the tip and here is the surface. So the process of approach closely brings it up, then the pen, then the cantilever, because of van der Waals interaction or attractive interaction, feels attraction, jumps to contact. So now they are in contact, and now you still want to move upward. So what is going to happen? This end is fixed, right. Therefore, since this is fixed, now further upward movement in fact again changes the deflection of the cantilever, and gradually the nature of deflection changes from this to this. What does it mean? Well, what it means is, as you push it up, it is obvious it is in the attractive regime, but the moment it comes in contact, you have actually reached this point, and then as you go further, you actually are repelling, because the surface is moving up and it is physically repelling the cantilever, right. So the net deflection on the cantilever reduces, and that is what is manifested here. See the curvature here, at the let us say this is 1, 2, 3, 4. I have deliberately drawn the way that at 2 the curvature is less, at 3 it is almost flat, again like when it was just aligned, its configuration is back to when it is just aligned, and in 4 now you see the curvature has reversed. Can you locate it on the force curve? And it is very easy. In fact, 1 is jump to contact, so this is point 1, here is point 2, you see you are in the net attractive regime, right, you are in the net attractive regime, therefore you have this type of a convex curvature, but the total net attraction has reduced as compared to that in the jump to contact, because of the fact that your surface is actually pushing the cantilever up. At 3 you see that this cantilever is almost flat, as if there is no attraction, there is no net force. Where is it possible? In fact, it is possible here, because the magnitude of the attraction sort of equals the magnitude of repulsion, and 4 is a point over here where the cantilever is in the net repulsive regime. So, most interesting to note is, so I should have marked this as 1. This is where I am marking it with A now. Before the surface came in proximity with the cantilever, the configuration was like this, and during the process of approach, you again cross the same cantilever once at this particular point on the force curve. This is fair enough, but simultaneously what is happening at the QPD, that is also very important to note. In fact, these cartoons drawn over here gives you a fair deal of idea, but I think I will sort of draw it in front of your eyes, so that you understand it even better. So, this point you understand, this point corresponds to the location of the reflected laser on the QPD corresponding to this configuration when you have not approached, right. So, light was falling here. Then as you bring the cantilever close to, as you bring the sample close to the cantilever, there is jump to contact. The cantilever takes a convex curvature, and as a result the reflected laser light now falls at this location. So, let us identify this point as the position of reflected laser at jump to contact. Now, what happens? In fact, your surface you are pushing up, right, and by means of what? By means of the sample surface itself, and eventually we have seen that at this point the deflection is going to get back to 0. It is going to take the same configuration before approach sequence started. So, what does it mean? As you traverse, as the cantilever traverse, or as the net deflection, net convex deflection in the cantilever reduces because of increase in the repulsive force. In fact, the laser light traverses back like this, and so point 2 corresponding to here will be somewhere over here. This again laser falls at point 3, laser falls at the center corresponding to the configuration shown in point 3, and now when the nature of the deflection changes to concave. So, finally, once you cross this point, the deflection in the cantilever sort of becomes like this, it becomes concave, right. And so, what happens? Now, laser starts to fall here in the first quadrant, right. So, is this clear? Initially, right after approach, laser was falling at the center, right. Then due to jump to contact, it sort of shifted to this location. Then after jump to contact has been achieved, the surface is pushing the cantilever upward. So, the laser in fact traverses back, the reading gradually reduces, the reading of the QPD gradually reduces, right. And then once it crosses point 3 and it enters the net repulsive regime, the cantilever now starts to show a concave deflection, and with increase in the concaveness of the deflected cantilever, the laser gradually shifts. Question to ask at this point is, how long do you allow this process of laser shifting this and that continue? In fact, you should appreciate that as this shifts away and away from the center, the deflection is increasing, and that is possible if the net force is increasing. So, a movement of the laser in this direction, enhancement of the extent of curvature of the tip, they all indicate increase in the net force. So, the force is going to increase, and if you do not stop it at an appropriate point, what is going to happen? What is going to happen is very simple. The surface, sample surface, is simply going to break the laser, break the tip, the cantilever. So, in order to prevent that breakage, the approach must stop somewhere, and that is something is your prerogative, the operator's prerogative. You predefine a set point which corresponds to a particular force at which you would like to scan your sample, but interestingly that force is defined in terms of millivolt, because you would set that set point on the QPD. So, where does the approach sequence stop? This I understand is a bit complicated thing. So, I have tried to go very slowly. Let us see, we will repeat again if necessary. So, as the deflected cantilever enters this regime and the movement of the stepper motor still continues, the laser spot gradually shifts, the reflected laser spot gradually shifts along this line, and you let us say have put up a set point of 2 millivolt. So, what will happen is when the reflected laser spot reaches 2 millivolt, the stepper motor will stop. What does it also mean? That if you have chosen set point in 2 millivolt and in another case you have chosen a set point of 3 millivolt, in the latter case you are actually going to scan at a higher force, which corresponds to on the cantilever, that in the first case, if this is the extent of curvature of the cantilever, in the second case the cantilever is going to sort of bend more. The how to, at what force you should scan, at what force you would scan is in many ways operator prerogative. Based on experience, people in fact generate an idea about what is the appropriate force for a particular type of a sample, and based on that people do the scan. So, now you understand the requirement of this so called set point into your system, and if you now look back into the slides I had initially shown, I guess now you understand the meaning of this small spot that was drawn initially. So, this is in fact the set point, and that is very appropriate to draw it a priori, because before your approach sequence starts you need to assign the set point, because the approach will continue till the deflection matches the force that corresponds to the set point, or yeah. So, now I think you should get a cohesive story that initially you had this aligned AFM, you start your approach which is being taken care by the stepper motor. Now, as the surface sample surface comes in close proximity with the cantilever tip, you essentially enter this attractive regime of the force curve. As a consequence of that, the cantilever till this point there was no deflection in the cantilever, and therefore, the reflected laser spot was falling at the center of the QPD. Now, since the cantilever bends, it also shifts, it does not no longer falls at the center anymore, but it falls let us say somewhere over here or somewhere over here. This picture is schematic is not fully correct, it falls somewhere over here. Just redraw. This location is not correct, it falls somewhere over here. That is where you achieve the jump to contact. but you do not stop your approach sequence at jump to contact. You continue to push your substrate against the cantilever, and as a consequence of that, the laser spot gradually shifts back, and when it reaches this point, in fact the net force on the force curve is at this point, right, but you typically would like to continue with your approach sequence beyond this point. So, the cantilever now changes the nature of its deflection. It was earlier a convex deflection, then it became straight again, like as if the net there is no net deflection, and then it becomes concave, and as you push it further, the laser spot gradually shifts in this direction till this process continues till the deflected laser light matches the force of the set point. Okay. And then what happens once your laser spot coincides with the set point, your approach stops. And consequence, your AFM, the piezo gets activated and your AFM is ready to scan. So, last couple of lectures, in fact, we have discussed some very interesting aspects of operational aspects of the AFM. So, I hope now you can understand the meaning of these two pictures. So, initially, in fact, one can also augment this picture by, sorry, I have the blue pen. So, this is where it is before approach, it is purely aligned, and the laser light is reflected from an undeflected AFM, from an undeflected tip, and then once you approach, you now understand how the approach sequence stops. The configuration is somewhere like this, and after approach, when your AFM is ready to scan, the laser light is not falling at the center, but it is actually falling at this point, which corresponds to the set point. But anyway, from this point onward, the piezo scanner takes over. So, this is an artist's impression about the tip interacting with the surface, and here you see the laser light falling and going. You have still not talked about how exactly this laser light is capable of tracking the deflection, but this whole technique of using this laser light for tracking the deflection of the AFM cantilever is known as the beam bounce method. So, we are running out of time in this particular lecture. So, I will stop here and we will pick up discussion on how an AFM scans and generates the data, and for that we need to talk about the different scanning modes, and we will discuss that in very simple terms. But before we move on, I would like to really request you to revise very seriously the discussions on atomic force microscope we had so far. That is the basic operating philosophy from that of an STM, and then what are the major components we have, and then how we align and how we approach, particularly the condition of the reflected laser spot during approach, as well as the configuration or the nature of deflection on the cantilever tip during approach. This will really help you in understanding the scanning sequence. Thank you very much.